With these you'll get to see tits of all different sizes. Hello everyone and welcome to the workshop. Don't do that introduction. It'll be fine. Some people won't find it funny. I just go for it. Got to have a bit of fun sometimes, haven't you? Right, what we're going to do today is make a knife. I've been wanting to do this for ages. I don't think I've made one for about a year now, so it's a little bit of a relearning process for me. But what I've done so far is I've designed a little neck knife, and I've just got a spare piece of paper and used a set of French curves to just basically pick something out of my mind that I thought might feel nice in the hand, be good. You can wear it around the neck so it's not going to be too big. It's maybe not exactly how it's going to turn out in the end because I might have other ideas as I go. And to give you a sense of scale, it's just a little neck knife. Have I got a ruler with me? I haven't, but you got the sense with my hand there and how it will sit in my hand that, yeah, it's going to be perfect. Haven't decided what handle material to use yet. We'll think about it as we go along. But it's going to be perfect just to have in a Kydex sheath hanging around my neck. I might put a little sort of webbing belt loop around the sheath so it can go on my belt, but just a lovely little neck knife. EDC, I think they call them. But the different thing I'm going to do is on this part here, I'm going to attempt what's called a hollow grind, and that'll be a completely new territory for me. And if I can just basically explain it with a little drawing. This is the tip of the knife here, obviously with the sharp point there. That's the bevel that I'm going to make, which will be a very, very small but quite steep bevel at the end. And then as we go up the blade, I'm actually going to go hollow and out and hollow and out to the thickness of the blade. I hope that makes it clear. Most blades will come sort of flat like that, and then in another bevel or just a continuous bevel, but this hollows out. And the reason for doing a hollow grind knife is, well, A, I've never tried it before and I'd like to give it a go, and B, really good for a multitude of projects where you may be doing a little bit of fine work, and funnily enough, that hollow that you put going sort of halfway up the blade actually makes an air pocket as you're cutting. So if you're cutting food or really sort of tough objects, that sort of thing, it does help part the work that you're cutting by having that little air pocket where the hollow is. Well, that's the science of it. I also think they look absolutely brilliant when done professionally. So you can but try. I've got some 4mm 1084 carbon steel. Basically the steel is much easier to work with. It has a very simpler hardening process, so I can use the forge that I've made myself, and they do keep a more easily maintainable edge. If you manage to dull a stainless steel blade, it does take an enormous amount of work to get it back to the standard, whereas carbon steel, it's much more forgiving and you can dull the blade. And if you do by hitting on a rock or something like that, it's much more simple to get it to that razor sharp edge again. I've got a piece of that carbon steel and I've covered it in layout fluid, which I've dried using my heat gun. It does dry pretty quickly anyway, but heat gun accelerates the process. And the beauty of this layout fluid is not only can you etch the shape of the knife, I'm not really going to do that. I'm going to stick this template on top of the layout fluid on the steel bar. But what I find with layout fluid is that even when I've cut out the shape of the knife and I'm using it on the grinder to sort of fine tune it, I find that having this blue shape is much easier to get a real feel for how the knife's going to look, rather than this kind of at the stage it is at the moment, this very dull steel. I don't know, it might be personal, but I just feel I can just sense the shape a lot better with this layout fluid on. So with that stuck on there, I can now use my variable speed bandsaw, which you took a look at in the last video, to cut this out. So there we have the basic knife shape. It's got a few lumps and bumps, but we've got the shape we need to get it on the grinder. Now there will be people that say, well, it's all well and good having such a lovely bandsaw that slows down and you can cut metal, but it can be done just as easily using an angle grinder. And I did make my first knife using an angle grinder to cut it out, and I was surprised how precise you can actually be. So if you think about making a knife, don't worry about getting the fancy bandsaw, just get yourself one of these, 30 quid from Screwfix. Now we're going to move to the start of grinding, and I've got my radius master rotated to the horizontal position, and on here I've got a 60 grit quite used belt. And when you're cutting metal for the first time and shaping those very sort of hard edges, it's good to use a used belt, because if you use a brand new one you're going to ruin it straight away. And you'll notice I've made a spark collector. I bought a big fuel funnel and I've lined it with speed tape, and going round that I've got speed taped it onto the funnel part, and it goes down into a bucket of water. Even though I'm sort of rough cutting, hope that can go into focus, any little saw marks from the bandsaw need to be removed at this stage, because when I harden it, it's going to be more and more difficult to get rid of any of these little imperfections. And here we have it so far. Now I'm not too fussed at this stage about knowing where I think the handle might end and what sort of shape it's going to go, nor which shape I'm actually going to make the grind. It was just some ideas I had. But that's going to be the shape of the knife, and you can see that I've made sure I've got a smooth surface to begin with. There's no point in beginning at this stage with any grind marks all the way around, and it's important that as you go around these corners that there are no sort of creases as it goes around in stages. You can get these little marks as I alter the angle of the grinder, and I've made sure that I've smoothed all those out. So we've got a very workable piece of steel now. I can take this off, doesn't matter if it doesn't come off in one piece because we're going to be grinding these flats down obviously, but there we are. Now I've never hand ground a bevel. I've always used a piece of bent aluminium that I bolt this to and then use it as a guide. And the aluminium's at a certain angle that it will make the perfect Scandi grind, but this is going to be a hollow grind hand ground bevel, and so just to stop me making a hash of what's called the plunge line, where the bevel begins to go upwards on the blade, I'm going to make myself a little plunge line guide. And to do that I've just got 2 bits of hardened stainless steel, a couple of, I think these are M4 bolts by the looks of things, got the nuts. I'm just going to drill a couple of holes, get these through, and what it does is I can put the knife in there, I can then lock these with the bolts exactly where I want my bevel, my line to go up on the knife like that, and as long as they're there, then I'm not going to come back too far and make a hash of the area here which I want to preserve really neatly. So these should, once bolted in place, and I hold the knife like that on the grinder, you get my drift. Basically, it just stops me going too far with my bevel. Well, these are done. There's just need a bit of cleaning off from the burrs created by the drilling, but that fits well, and they'll make a good plunge line guide. That's a 60 grit belt, and I hope you can see there that I've now only just gone up to my scribe line, just nudging it, but not, in fact, not quite gone to it, which is where I want to be, because I don't want the cutting edge to warp when I harden. But so the next stage is I've got a couple of holes there for the main pins, and I'm going to now drill out some small 4mm holes. I'm not sure if you can just see, I've scribed there where the handle approximately is going to go, and so I'm going to make sure that I don't go beyond that scribe line there. I've got my knife and I've got a magnet here, and as you can see the knife is magnetic, and what I've got to do to heat treat it is heat it to the beyond magnetic stage, so that when I use the magnet it doesn't have any attraction to it. I take it for about another 5 minutes after the non-magnetic stage, then I quench it in some crisp and dry, which is actually rapeseed oil, which I've heated up to about 30-35 degrees. As long as it's not too cold, that's the important thing. And then I'll quench the knife in the oil that's down here. So the first thing is to start heating this up and get it non-magnetic. There you go, and you can actually just tell by the way it sounds that that's not making any sort of marks or biting into the steel, so that is a hardened knife. So this knife, although it's hardened now, it's actually very brittle, and it seems a bit of an oxymoron that, but the blade is hard as rock. But if you put it in a vise and started to try and bend it, it wouldn't bend at all, it wouldn't flex, and it would then just snap. So what I'm going to do now is called tempering the blade, and that just very simply involves putting it in an oven at about 200 centigrade, 400-ish Fahrenheit, and leaving it in there for an hour, then allowing it to cool just down to room temperature, and then giving it another hour at the same temperature, and that's called tempering. And what that does is, yes, it takes a little bit of the hardness out, but it allows the blade to flex just that little bit. So when you're chopping away, it may be something hard, it doesn't shatter, because every blade's got to have a little bit of flex in it. So next is, well, clean this pigsty up, but then get on with the tempering process. Well, folks, the reason for that long transition there is, I'm afraid we're 2.5 weeks down the line. You can probably tell I've had quite a bad sort of flu infection. Took quite a bit of time off work. Didn't have the energy to get up the stairs. And coupled with that is that I realised I'd made a right old bollocks of the knife up to this point. And I'll show you the sort of blatant mistake that I've made. Although it looks fairly neat and tidy, what I've done is I've ground far too deeply and come straight up to the spine, so that there's actually an indentation. Let's see if this camera will pick it up. There, so I wanted the spine to just gradually taper towards the point, and as you can see there's actually a step in there, which is one of the things I don't want. And the other thing is I only wanted my grind lines to come up to about following a line like that. And then in this part here, which would just be a continuation of these that we call the flats, I wanted to get my logo in there. So I've ground it far too far. And I went and did that with 2 of the knives. So yeah, it's a learning process. What I've done is I've gone in too much of an angle, which has, taken it right up to the spine. But what I did do, I was about to throw it away, and then someone on this Facebook beginner's knife group that I'm a member of said, well, just put an edge on it and put it down to just sort of a workshop knife. And look, yeah, it's got a reasonable cutting edge to it. So that's my kind of, I'm not going to put a handle on it, but that will be my workshop knife. And what I've done now is I've got a lovely mounted block of spalted oak there that I've turned into a knife rack, and I've made 1, 2, 3 more blanks, and there's another couple of the ones that I've made a mess of. That might be redeemable, that certainly isn't, but here are 3 more that I've made. And so I've made those 3 knives, I've heat treated them, and I remembered to put in the sharpening notch before heat treating, so there was no risk of me softening the metal, and we're ready to start the grinding process again. A couple of other things that have happened. Take a look at this. This is from a friend on that forum in Facebook. His beard has got far too big for him to use these sort of respirators, so I'll show you it on later obviously, but this is now a powered respirator that I don't have to keep taking it on and off, and it doesn't get full of condensation, so that's going to make my sort of workflow a lot more pleasant. Wait till you see this. This is the addition to the workshop, and it's going to really open my knife making opportunities up. Got myself a furnace sent from Forno Prederi in Italy. He's a great guy, and inside there looks tiny, but that goes in about 40 centimeters, so you can do some pretty big knives. Got a nice little rack in there. It's got a controller down here to set your temperatures, and you can maintain a temperature, and I am really excited. This means that I can do stainless steel, and I don't have to send the blades away to Graham Clark, who's a good mate of mine, but it's just one of these things that I'd like to be able to do completely in-house. So that furnace with the temperature it can get up to, and the fact that I can leave the blades to soak, which just means maintain a temperature for a certain amount of time, that will do the trick, and I think it's absolutely brilliant. So I'm going to get my new Darth Vader gear on, fire up that grinder, and get on with these, well, get on with attempt number 2 at grinding these blades. Well, that's the 36 done. One thing I forgot to say when we did that long transition was I've decided to do what's called a flat grind to begin with. I was kind of running before, I was walking, and I was just trying to freehand on that soft kind of 8-inch wheel there, which should put a nice hollow grind in, but it's an art that I'm going to learn, so I'm going to do baby steps, and this is how I've got so far on this blade. And I'm quite pleased that that's a nice uniform grind, and I'm not going to actually go much further up towards the spine than that. I'm going to just raise it slightly now that going through with the higher grip belts. but I just want to just take it in tiny little steps as I go further up the spine. And at the moment, these flats here that I talked about earlier are still a nice lot of room. They'll be beautifully silver as well. A nice lot of room for me to get the logo in there. And so I'm just going gently, and then you know, as the days and weeks pass, I'll be able to bring this grind line here gradually up towards, a little bit further up towards the spine. But for now, I think, and for my first free grind, jigless, that looks like a pretty uniform shape. So now I'll just work my way through the grits, and the grits will just slowly narrow the cutting edge. I've got it down to about, I would say, 0.2 of a millimetre. They'll slowly narrow that cutting edge and raise the grind line, and also start to make this blade look pretty smooth. And I want to get it nice satin finish. So onwards with the grits. How boring, slow and steady wins the race, but it's true. I've now finished off, you just saw me then on what's called a gator belt. Let me have a look. Here's one here. They're great. They don't remove stock, but they're a really good finishing belt. And they take it up to, well, the one I was just using then was about a 400 grit. And I quite like the knives that I make to not have this polished finish. I do like them to just have a little bit of a grind line in there. And this isn't yet finished. I'm just going to move on to what's called a finishing belt. But the main thing is the grinds are constant. If you see, there's a nice bit of flat there, and on that side it's exactly the same. So it's symmetrical, which is what I wanted. But I'm just so pleased with the way this has gone, and I just had to keep it slow. Nice constant plunge lines in there, and I got a feeling this is going to be a really nice knife. So I'm going to get a finishing belt on, which is Scotch Brite. It's almost just got a sort of quite a bit of friction to it, but it's just like a, I don't know how you say it, a little bit like a scrubbing brush. There's something about knives that when they're finished, I do like to see a bit of this kind of workmanship in it. If it's this perfect polished finish, then it could have been done any way. I like to end up just with maybe some of the thinnest, most constant lines going through the flats. So I've got vaguely a few grind lines left on the blade, nothing that's going to impinge the way it works, and then I'm going to work through the grits probably to about 400, so that it's finished beautifully smooth, but just with that hand finish look to it. I'll just flip the knife over after happily finishing with that 400 just to check on the other side, and just can see some tiny scratches, so I'm going to have to go back about 2 grits, as in 2 stages of sandpaper, and just get rid of those, because even when I give this knife to someone, and they probably won't notice them, I'll know they're there. Well, it's a pain in the backside being a perfectionist, but I have now got the blade to a level that I want it, and I've actually went back to the grinder and put some vertical lines on that bevel there, because I didn't like it having that satin finished. I wanted some sort of craftsman's lines in the blade. So I'm at a stage now where I can put the maker's mark on and tidy this workshop. Then I'm going to tape up this blade part and get on with the handle. I've got these vinyls that have my Richard Outdoors logo on. important that it doesn't move as I'm sort of dabbing the etching liquid on, which is just a mixture of vinegar and diluted with a bit of water. Dip this in the electrolyte and hope for the best. Just keep dabbing it on in sort of few second intervals. I can see the electrolyte bubbling away there, so it's doing its thing. So you can focus on there, and as you see, it's just discoloured around the sort of edges of the lettering, which I'll use a bit of wire wool and Windex, very fine wire wool and Windex, just to clean that up. But that's a very neat etch mark, and I'm pleased with that. This knife is now taped up, so I don't have to worry about scratching this blade area. And it's going to have a micarta, black micarta handle with a nice red lining in there, which will pop nicely. So I'm just going to cut out a couple of pieces of this micarta and then think about exactly how I want the handle shaped. I've cut the micarta on the G10 linings there, and I'm just using a bit of 120 grit paper just to roughen up the inside there so that I can get a reasonable bond onto the G10, and that's where I'll have to leave you to the next cut, because I'm going to leave this overnight to set once I attach the G10 liners to this micarta here. One bit on there like that, give it a little bit of a straighten, clamp them up. See you in the morning. Here we go then, 24 hours later, and these should be well and truly solid, which they are. Okay, so what we've done is just neatened off. They're obviously going to be cut to shape anyway for the that knife handle, but the main thing is I've got a nice sort of workable piece of micarta now, and what the idea is that eventually, and the spine will be pristinely clean, but that's the sort of effect we're going to get. And this is going to be an awful lot thinner, this handle, because it's only a small knife, but that's what I'm looking at. What I'm going to do now is just lay the handle of the blade on there now. I'm going to clamp it down, etch around the basic shape of the handle, and then I'm going to draw, still with this blade in place, 2 4mm holes in there, and once they're drilled I then know that I can take the blade away and just use one of these to hold the plates against the scales against each other, and I can roughly cut out the beginnings of the handle. Just going to go very gradually through here because I don't want the drill bit to absolutely pop out the other side, leaving any raggedy bits. So I'm just doing it almost millimetre by millimetre. I can see there by the shavings that I've gone through the liners, which is good, and I'm just feeling now, I think I've just poked out the other side now. So 2 4mm holes drilled, and they're going to be for these stainless steel loveless bolts which pull the handle together once it's epoxied. But before I move the clamp, it's really important that I etch the shape of my blade, because I'm about to cut this out and I don't want to make a bollocks up of going inside any lines. Good. Shall we risk it? Risk it for a biscuit. There we go. I don't know if you can see that, but I've got the shape of my blade. Now that doesn't matter now if these come apart. I've got to remember which one's which, obviously. But to cut it out, Ben Orford, trying to get people to work, no thank you. Ben Orford taught me this great trick where you put one of your loveless bolts in, you do the collar up like that so that it's not quite protruding along the bottom, but just about there. And then as you're cutting it out on the bandsaw, these obviously can't slip, and therefore you get a nice neat shape throughout the scales. So I'll get on the bandsaw and do that. So this is where we are. That's going to be what the handle will look like. I've made a nice little curve on the shoulders there. Next thing is to start chamfering these edges off a little bit because I want them to curve down towards the blade, and then once that's done I've got to get this front face to show standard, because once the blade's in there you just can't get to it without possibly scratching the blade, which I've spent such a lot of work on. So next thing is to get these front faces chamfered down 45-degree angle, and then to a show standard buff on the front. Right, I've got to make tea. I'm going to now chamfer these shoulders of the knife handle down. Now I've drilled some deeper holes to house the loveless bolts. They look a bit raggedy, but this is all going to be sanded and finished nicely. And what I've made here is a little jig, just a piece of 45-degree block of pine that I've screwed to a piece of MDF, and that saves me continually having to alter the angle here of my tool rest, and therefore I can just plonk this on, have my tool rest still at a nice 90, which I like for most of my work, and then making sure I get this the right way around, I'll be able to get a nice 45 on there. And I'm going to start with a 60 belt, get it just about a millimetre short of the liner here before I start increasing the grits. And that's finish them after you can barely see that there's a gap between the liners there, and the shoulders of that handle look like glass. There's still that tiny texture because Mikata's made of material plus resin, which is exactly the effect that you want to get. This is the bit where you've got to have absolutely everything perfectly clean. And I'm using acetone for that. Made some divots in the handles there. Make sure I get right in there with the acetone. Good. Right. Panic. Number 1, 2, it fits. Just use a screwdriver here to pull these all together. And there we are. That's on the glue up, and I got myself to write tiz there because I thought this seemed to be getting quite a lot, less malleable as the minutes went on, and then I realised I'd used 5-minute epoxy, so it was action stations. But it's all glued up and drying quite nicely. I'm not going to put clamps on it because these loveless bolts will hold it all together nicely. I went in there very quickly with WD-40 on a cotton bud to make sure there was no, well, to get rid of all the excess, because getting in there once the epoxy is set is nigh on impossible. So I think I'll give it maybe half an hour and have a go at shaping this handle. But at the moment I'm pretty pleased. Loveless bolts have gone in nice and symmetrically, which means there's a good bit buried of each collar into the handle, so that when I do start sanding, I want to be careful that I've obviously got lots of the pin to work with, but it's almost at the kind of width that I'm happy with, so it's just going to be a case of knocking off the edges and shaping it to get it just right. And there we are. Let's hope get rid of somebody talking to me on the screen. There we are. So that's the finish I wanted to get to, which is a 400 grit gator belt finish. Beautifully polished down the spine, but still with some very light sort of, I like to call them craftsman lines, just to show the fact that it's handmade with a lot of consideration given for every bit of detail. So the next bit is to start working on this main part of the handle here, and this is where I've got to be careful. I'm going to draw some lines so I get the corners off at equal angles, and then it's not going to be a Coke bottle shaped handle, it's just going to be rounded off along all these hard edges, and this is the bit where I've got to be perfectly symmetrical, so I'm going to draw myself some guidelines. And once that's done, I'll get it on the buffing wheel and finish it off. Well, I've got to get an edge on it first, but I have a machine for that. Right then, the final hurdle before buffing. This is the knife in, what is a knife vise actually, made by a guy called Mike Palmer, who's a very, very talented engineer and knife maker as well. And so saves you having to take it out of a vise all the time and rotate the vise and whatnot. But yeah, I'm just going to start going through using these sort of permeable sanding sheets. They're quite good because, especially with micarta, they don't get clogged up. And I'll just go until I'm happy that I've got no scratches, probably up to about 400 on this, and then maybe ended in sort of 800, so I know there are no scratches on it. Maybe clean up the spine and it'll be ready for buffing, and that'll be the knife finished and just the sheath to go. Right. Well, that's an hour of hand sanding, and it's yet to go on the buffer, but that's to an 800 grit hand sanding. Still can see some of the canvas through, which is what I want because it's canvas micarta after all. But I think it's time to get that on the buffing wheel and have a look. To show you halfway through, that's sort of half the handle buffed, half not, and you can see the beautiful canvas texture coming through. It just feels like glass, the handle. I'm going to take the tape off now. I haven't got an edge yet. But there it is. But I'm not yet willing to say that's anything like the finished product. And I've come into the house because these two are missing me, so we'll finish the knife off here. So I've got the knife in my TS Prof sharpener, and I think I'm going to sharpen the edge to 20 degrees. And the way I do that is put an angle cube on the grinding stone, which is resting against the blade, and then zero it. And then move that to the pivotable point of the sharpener, and then I can set the exact degrees I want. Right, I've been through the grits and just using the strop now, a little bit of compound on there, and making sure I just go one way on this bevel. Right, so the question is it sharp? I believe it is. Obviously got to clean it up, but we've got a nice polished bevel on there. So a massive stack of Pringles, excuse me. Right, a lot of people do these tests with a bit of A4 sort of printer paper, and it's pretty stiff paper really. So I've got this glossy stuff out of one of my daughter's pony magazines. One knife, let's see. And they do it too fast as well, which you could cut anything if you did it fast enough. So the idea, slow curves. Okay folks, well I realise it's been a long video, so I don't want to labour making the sheath, because I think I've made a Kydex sheath on YouTube before, but I've got the blade of my knife all taped up. I've got my Kydex press all ready with the clamps, and I'm just going to use a piece of black Kydex at this size, pop it into my newly purchased second-hand oven, and you have to get this stuff about the consistency, if you can imagine a ready lasagna sheet, kind of quite pliable, so it's obviously got to be able to fold in on itself. So get this in, get this nice and bendy, and into the press. Right, well that's the knife in the Kydex nicely folded around it. You probably noticed that I manoeuvred the knife a little bit just before I clamped it hard to make sure it got into the crease of the Kydex there. So that's going to take about 10 to 15 minutes until it cools down and sets nice and hard again. There you go. It's taken a really nice shape. So the next job is to sort of hand sketch a little shape that I want this little Kydex sheath to be, and clean it out, drill some eyelets, and then get it all smoothed off, and just mess around with the top bit here so we get a nice retention of the blade in there. But I've got to go to New York first thing tomorrow morning, so a few things to do, and I'll see you next week. Easy, 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 easy. Yay! Got away with another one. Right, where am I? Yes, you're back home. Okay, well I've got the nice Kydex now moulded around the shape of the blade, and I'm just going to use these really good French curves to kind of make a really nice outline that comes around, makes room for the eyelets, and then I'll get to work on this area, which is the, as I said earlier, the area where the blade is gets its most retention from. So rather than take this in one fell swoop, I need to sort of eke out the cutting on this bit by bit. Right, to get the shape sorted. There we go, got it approximately. I'm just going to go slightly outside that line on the bandsaw, and then there's plenty of scope for getting it on the grinder with a nice high grip belt to get that final shape in, but it's a good starting point. I've just rough cut that out at the moment. I'm going to get the gator belt on there, make a nice sort of dip in here, and then just start putting the knife in and checking for retention. And before that, I'm going to get in there, before I do the rivets, make sure I get in there and clean it all out with acetone. I've also got some spray air cans, and I'm going to spray all the dust out as well and get rid of these burrs, because if I chop these burrs off and leave them down there, they're going to scratch the blade. So it's a case of getting it really nicely cleaned up before I start messing around too much with the blade. More or less the shape of the top there, 3 holes drilled and countersunk. There's method in my spacing there, which I'll come into, and I'll put this first rivet in at the top, which should help close this up. And there's the knife. At the moment that sounds pretty good, and what you do is once you've got that first rivet in, it's obviously going to tighten things up, and it might be that I need to put the heat gun on briefly to get the retention a little bit tighter, but we'll see how it goes. If you're ever going to make these Kydex sheaths, then the eyelets, they have a nice side and a, well, still an okay side, but a not so nice side, and really want to work out whether it's going to be a left-handed or a right-handed sheath. So if it's depends which side you want it, but basically make sure you know you have a show side and obviously one that's less attractive depending on which side the wearer is going to put the sheath. So yeah, always check for left-handed or right-handedness, because once you put these eyelets in, they're a bugger to get out. So I put those through like that, just get them on my press now. Very nice, even though I say so myself. You see, they're not bad on the non-show side, but ever so nicer on the bit that you want on the outside. Good, let's have a play with this knife. Now that's in, and I can already tell that's going to be far too tight. So I'm just going to get the heat gun on there and start. Oh, it comes out okay. Yeah, I think just a little bit of loosening with the heat gun. Okay, well I've got the sheath pretty much finished. I've got a little bit of a thumb ramp there. The blade now goes in nicely with a good click and comes out nice and easy. No rubbing on the blade. I've got some nice mineral oil on there now to help it preserve the blade, because it's 1084, you don't want it to rust, and it just helps it slide in and out of the sheath nicer. So just to finish off, I've got 2 pieces of rubber coated sort of webbing there, which I've cut to size, put some holes at each end, and I'm just going to make a little sort of belt loop pair for this sheath. So there you are, a couple of belt loops there, and so it can go as a vertical carry or a sort of carry where you stick it on the back of your belt. And let's see, there she goes. Ooh, beautiful, no rattle, and there she is. I love that belt loop. You can make it a vertical or sideways carry, and knife comes out really nicely with that thumb ramp, slides in, good retention, and that, yeah, nice and straight. Has taken some time, but I'm very pleased with the finished product. Right, so I was going to sell this knife, but I decided that's just doesn't feel right, doesn't sit right with me. So I've decided to give it away, and I'm giving it away to a really, really good friend of mine. And she did 30 years in the police force, including assignments to some, let's just say, pretty sort of grim aspects of police work, and left after 30 years without a fanfare. Didn't expect anything, and that person sort of remains very kind of humble and not expecting, anything for the amount of time she gave to her country. So, Diane, this is for you, and I believe I'm taking you flying sometime in the next couple of months, so you can't take it on the aeroplane, but this is for you, and I hope you take this. Oh, I'll just move that carriage clock off the mantelpiece and replace it with a homemade Richard Outdoors knife. And I'm looking forward to seeing you and giving this to you. Okay, folks, it's been a long video. Hope you've enjoyed it. I tried to keep it as short as possible, but it's taken me a couple of months to make that. Well, definitely 6 weeks. So I'll leave it there. But please like and subscribe to the channel if you want. I'll keep doing sort of this sort of thing, bushcraft, that kind of malarkey. But for now, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I very much look forward to seeing you all again.